There is a house built out of stone, with wooden floors, walls and windowsills, with tables and chairs worn by all of the dogs. And this is a place where I don't feel alone, and this is a place where I feel like home.
All right, y'all, let's begin with prayer, and we'll go ahead and now get going. God, we thank you again for a new week, for another day, for friendship, for this church community. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for loving us. May your Spirit guide us today, Lord, as we discuss what it means to know you, to be loved by you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Also, the other thing I forgot to mention, several people have asked about Ada. We are still in the NICU. We thought she was graduating last Sunday, but turns out she's a couple credits shy. So we got to get those knocked out. But we hope and think she'll be coming home really, really soon. So last week we discussed how we all, due to feelings of both guilt and pride, tend to invalidate our own particular pain, our own particular suffering, our own particular experience of hardship, and how this invalidation inhibits our growing and our understanding of who we are and who God is. And we quickly contrasted this particular pain and suffering with the idea of general, universal pain and suffering, which we'd said, of course, we acknowledge because we're comfortable copying to such an obvious fact as admitting that our lives aren't perfect. We know that to cop to something so obvious or to not cop to something so obvious would be a blatant lie. So we don't want to be such transparently dishonest people with both ourselves and with others. So yes, of course, we admit to ourselves and others that we experience pain on a general level, but particular pain, that's what we really looked at. We differentiated general suffering from particular suffering. I want to really drive home those words today, general versus particular. We went on to talk about how in not looking at and validating our own particular suffering, we can't possibly know the deeper impact that those experiences have had and continue to have on shaping how we see the world and how we interact with everyone around us, including, most especially, how we see and how we interact with God. And we went on to discuss how no matter what our own particular pain and suffering has been, those experiences were and they are true pain. True pain. How we don't have to be starving in Somalia or living on the streets of Greensboro to have experienced real, true suffering. That the particular pain and hardship that we've experienced in our own lives is just that. Pain and suffering. And how we need to validate it. And to underscore these points, we looked at a passage from Nick Hornby's novel, How to Be Good, that in my estimation, gives a really powerful defense for why we should validate our own particular hardship. And just as a refresher, I want to read that quick paragraph one more time. This is a father, again, talking about his 8-year-old daughter, Molly. What has happened to Molly in her first 8 years? More or less nothing. We've protected her from the world as best we can. She's been brought up in a loving home. She has 2 parents. She's never been hungry. And she receives an education that will prepare her for the rest of her life. And yet she's sad. And that sadness is not, when you think about it, inappropriate. The state of the relationship between her parents makes her anxious. She's lost a loved one and a cat. And she's realized that such losses are going to be an unavoidable part of her life in the future. It seems to me now that the plain state of being human is dramatic enough for anyone. You don't need to be a heroin addict or a performance poet to experience extremity. You just have to love someone. I love that. You just have to love someone. And we discussed how we've all loved someone, or loved someone. Consequently, we therefore all felt pain. So today, I want to build on last week's discussion, but instead of looking at how we have a more difficult time acknowledging particular pain versus general pain, what I want to look at this morning is how we have a more difficult time practicing particular love versus general love. With me on that one? How we have a difficult time practicing particular love than general love. And I'm going to spend time today unpacking what I mean by that. But first, I want to explore several different angles as entry points to this conversation. I want to read Romans 7, verses 21 through 25, Mark 12, verses 28 through 31. I'm going to read the paragraph that immediately follows the one that we just read in this Nick Hornby book. And then we're going to look at a song by the country artist Keith Urban. And like I say, all of these, I think, are good entry points for our discussion this morning. So first, here's Romans 7, starting at verse 14. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I don't want to do, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that the good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. And quickly before looking at our passage from Mark, I want to point out how the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, he defines sin as selfishness. He says that this is an apt characterization of the core of all sin is selfishness, this bent towards selfishness. And I think for our discussion this morning, we would do well to understand sin in this context as utter selfishness, deeply embedded selfishness. That said, here's Mark 12, starting at verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." Let me read this last verse one more time because it's here that we're going to spend specific attention this morning. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, back to Nick Hornby. In the following passage, which as I said, this is the paragraph immediately following the one that we just read. Here, Hornby's narrator, after just considering how Molly, his 8-year-old daughter, is perfectly justified in being sad and anxious, he continues that exact line of thinking like this. "And the other thing I think is that I have failed my daughter. 8 years old, and she's sad. I didn't want that. When she was born, I was certain I could prevent it, and I've been unable to. And even though I see that the task I set myself was unrealistic and unachievable, it doesn't make any difference. I have still participated in the creation of yet another confused and fearful human being." Is that not a sad but unflinchingly honest and realistic look at the world and at ourselves as human beings? No matter how much we try not to, we inevitably hurt those that we love the most. One of the saddest truths there is. In fact, I thought about this very passage 19 days ago when Ada was born. When I was first holding her in the NICU, April still in the delivery room. So just the two of us, just Ada and I sitting together in that little NICU suite, no one else around. Here she was, this beautiful little creature, this perfect little life, this innocent little treasure, this perfect little being that somehow I had been given the incredible responsibility to love and protect and raise and guide and teach and provide for. And as I held her that morning, my heart could have burst. It was so overwhelmed with my love for this little girl. And I kept whispering it to her. I kept whispering to her how much I loved her, how much I'd always love her, how there was nothing she could ever do to change that, how I would always protect her, always defend her, how I'd never let anybody hurt her. But as soon as I whispered that last bit about not ever letting anybody hurt her, a very sobering and painful reality occurred to me. Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Though I'll spend the rest of her life trying to protect her from being hurt, I can't. She is going to experience pain, and she's going to experience suffering, and she is going to experience hardship. What's more, I knew that no matter how hard I try, I will be responsible for some of that pain and some of that hurt. It will be the chief shame and the chief regret of my life, but when all is said and done, little Ada will have experienced pain in her life, and I will be responsible for some of it. So holding her that morning, after whispering to her how much I loved her, I whispered to her that there was going to come a time when I was going to somehow let her down. And I whispered how much I wished that that wasn't the case. And I told her how profoundly sorry that I am that I can't prevent it from happening. How profoundly sorry I am that I'm not perfect. How profoundly sorry I am that I, like everyone else in the world, like Ada herself, have to go through life burdened by the indomitable taint of selfishness. And how this affliction will somehow be directly responsible for my letting her down in some important way. And how chances are I, and perhaps even she, won't even be aware of it, aware of how I've done it, until many, many years later. And it's this I want to focus on this morning. This indomitable taint, this indomitable stain of selfishness that I speak about, and how it's this selfishness that promotes general love while thwarting our real aim, which is particular love. And just before playing this song by Keith Urban, I want to tell you something that I had a theology professor say to me years ago, and it's something that has always stuck with me. In fact, it's one of those things that when it was spoken to me, lodged in the back of my brain for some reason. I hadn't really chewed on it. But then a couple years later, it came back to me, and suddenly I really grasped the totality of what he was saying here. He said, love is never general. Love is always particular. If it's not particular, then it isn't love. It's simply sentiment. Let me do it one more time. Love is never general. It's always particular. If it isn't particular, it isn't really love. It's just sentiment. Now we're going to revisit that quote in just a minute, but now I want you to listen to the song Stupid Boy by Keith Urban. As you do, try not to focus on the literal relationship between the characters in the song, which is of a man and his lover, but instead focus on the insight that has compelled the third-person narrator who's singing about this man and his lover and what he has witnessed about their relationship. I want you to focus on the insight that compelled this narrator to sing this song, on the insight he has here about the man in question's character. Again, this is called Stupid Boy by Keith Urban.
Well, she was precious like a flower. She grew wild, but innocent. A perfect prayer in a desperate hour. She was everything beautiful and different. Stupid boy, you can't fence that in, stupid boy. It's like holding back take her and break her down. Well, she laid her heart and soul right in your hands, and you stole her every dream and you crushed her plans. She never even knew she had a choice, and that's what happens when the only voice she hears is telling her she can't. And you stupid boy, oh, you always had to be right. Now you've lost the only thing that ever made you
Y'all ever heard that song before? Well, she was precious like a flower. She grew wild, wild and innocent. Like a perfect prayer in a desperate hour. She was everything beautiful and different. And so what made you think you could take a life and just push it around? She used to build herself up so high. Now you take her and you break her down. You stupid boy. If we get beyond hearing this song as just a lament for the way that a possessive, controlling, insecure boyfriend treated his girlfriend, which is what it is on the surface, we'll quickly see that this song is about all of us, about everyone in the world, about how we all get privileged with the incomprehensibly awesome gift of being in relationship with other human beings. If you really stop to think about what an incomprehensible gift this is, that we are created beings and that we get to be in relationship with other created beings, with lovers, with parents, children, friends, how each of these people, by virtue of their bearing the imago Dei, which is the image of God, that which Genesis promises us we are all bearers of, the imago Dei, how by virtue of all of us being bearers of this, how everyone we encounter is a bearer of that imago Dei, how they are all precious and unique and of infinite importance and value, and how when we enter into a relationship with those closest to us, each of them is to us precious like a flower, wild and innocent. That is the beginning of our deepest relationships. That person, that other person, is precious like a flower, wild and innocent. It doesn't have to be a young child that's come into the world. The beginning of the relationship with whom we're going to spend the rest of our life, our relationship when we first are blessed to have parents, all of those, they're precious like a flower, wild, innocent. As Keith Urban says, they're everything beautiful and different. It's that beauty and that difference that has caused them to make that type of an impact immediately on us as people. Then how we over time, unintentionally undertake actions and make decisions that in varying degrees and in differing fashions take that precious and beautiful and unique life and, quote, push it around, break it down a little bit. In fact, the song's narrator seems to have this very same epiphany himself in the shift of the poem. As the song turns at the very end, you hear him suddenly, he's been singing about this other person, and then he suddenly sings, I'm that same old stupid boy. The key, I think, is in our being able to recognize that. We're quite adept at recognizing the way our loved ones have somehow wounded us. But the question is, are we equally adept at recognizing how we have wounded our loved ones? If we all immediately recognize that we've been in some way wounded by our loved ones, which I think we do, then it stands to reason that we've all also wounded our own loved ones. It's logically inconsistent to believe that all of us are somehow takers of relational mishandling, but none of us are purveyors of it. We all get wounded, but we all wound. And so why do we have such a hard time recognizing that second part? I don't know. I imagine it's for several reasons. But here's one I'm convinced of. Because we know our own intentions. We always know our own intentions. Whereas we don't see the intentions of those who've hurt us, we know that our own intentions toward those we love were, in fact, always loving. Always at our core sincere. And so we reason, if our intentions were always loving and sincere, which we know that they were, then how could we possibly be responsible for doling out pain? Here's how Paul would answer that question. That which I do not want to do, I do. And that which I want to do, I don't do. And here's how Reinhold Niebuhr, the theologian, would paraphrase it. Because we were born selfish creatures. The question, then, is what are we to do about it? What can we do about it? If selfishness is both pervasive and indomitable, and if we're inevitably going to hurt those that we love, what's there to do other than become pessimistic and self-defeatist about it? Here's Jesus' answer to that. Love your neighbors as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. We've all heard that commandment all our lives. It's one of the very first lessons we're taught as children in Sunday school. And I don't think there's any of us that would deny that it is a vitally important sentiment. But that's just the problem. Because of our selfish nature, we reduce this vital teaching to a sentiment. Having said that, let me now remind you once again what I told you that theology professor of mine said one time. Love is always particular, never general. If it's general, it's not love at all. It's sentiment. In other words, sure, loving our neighbors as ourselves sounds really good. It's a great thing to say. It's a great thing to think about. When the rubber meets the road, when theory tries to become practice, it proves to be far more difficult than we imagine. I'm assuming everyone can resonate with that idea. To demonstrate this, to really illustrate the difference between general love and particular love, I want to read a quick passage to you from Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. This is actually the passage that we looked at for the kickoff of our Bible study through a literary lens this week. Here, an old priest is sharing the story of a doctor that he once knew. He says, "That's exactly the same sort of thing a doctor told me a long time ago. He was an elderly and undoubtedly clever man. He spoke to me as frankly as you just have, though he did in jest and mournful jest. 'I love humanity,' he said to me, 'but I can't help being surprised at myself. The more I love humanity in general, the less I love men in particular. I mean separately, as separate individuals. In my dreams,' he said, 'I'm very often passionately determined to serve humanity, and I might quite likely have sacrificed my life for my fellow creatures if, for some reason, it had been suddenly demanded of me. And yet I'm quite incapable of living with anyone in one room for 2 days together, and I know that from experience. As soon as anyone comes close to me, his or her personality begins to oppress my vanity and restrict my freedom. I'm capable of hating the best of men and women in 24 hours. One because they sit too long over dinner, another because they have a cold in the head and keep on blowing their nose. I become an enemy of people the moment they come close to me. But on the other hand, it's invariably happened that the more I hate people individually, the more ardent becomes my love for humanity at large.'" Doesn't this resonate at our very core? I hope it does, or else there's something really wrong with me. What this passage proves is that we're far better at talking about how we will love others than we are at actually practicing that love. With this being the case, then how can we act on Jesus' commandment, love your neighbor as yourself? If we have such a hard time generating love for particular persons, how can we then love them as ourselves? We have to assume Jesus meant what he said, or else he wouldn't have said it. So how are we supposed to do it? I struggled for years to understand why Jesus would command us to do something that my own experience had proven to me time and again was impossible. To love someone as myself. But then one day, I stumbled upon the following teaching from C.S. Lewis, and I realized that the problem was that I had a mistaken notion of what Jesus actually means right here by love. I realized that Jesus is not saying to love particular persons generally, in other words, sentimentally, in other words, how I feel, but rather saying to love particular persons particularly. In other words, to love them the way that we love ourselves, particularly, in all of our own uniqueness and individuality and complexity. Here's how C.S. Lewis explains this. We might start by trying to understand exactly what loving your neighbor as yourself means. I have to love my neighbor as I love myself. Well, how exactly do I love myself? Now that I come to think of it, I've not exactly got a feeling of fondness or affection for myself at all times, and I don't even always enjoy my own society. So apparently love your neighbor does not mean feel fond of him or find him attractive. I ought to have seen that before, because of course you cannot feel fond of a person by trying. Do I think well of myself? Think myself a nice person? Well, I'm afraid I sometimes do, and those are no doubt my worst moments. But that's not why I love myself. In fact, it's the other way around. My self-love makes me think myself nice, but thinking myself nice is not why I love myself. So loving my neighbor does not apparently mean thinking them nice either, and that's an enormous relief. So what C.S. Lewis is getting at here is that we love ourselves not because we always think ourselves lovable, but because we know ourselves to be particular persons with particular concerns, with particular foibles, and we live with ourselves every day of our lives, and we will the best constantly for ourselves. In other words, we know ourselves to be unique individuals. We know the full measure of our own humanity. So the key, it seems, at least to me, is to be ever conscious of the particularity of those around us. In other words, to not be discouraged at our inability to maintain sentimental love for everyone at all times, but instead to be vigilant in loving them for their uniqueness and for their particularity. Now, the point might be argued that yes, engendering particular love for strangers or for those we dislike or for those with whom we only have passing acquaintance can be very difficult. But for our loved ones, for those closest to us, particular love is the very essence of the relationship. They are our loved ones because we know that we love them particularly. So with them that our love, we think, is not a sentiment, but is in fact real love. It's not just a feeling, it is real love. And my response is yes, but no. Yes, but no. It's our loved ones and those closest to us whom we most desire and whom we intend at all times to love particularly. But it's they who we most easily deceive ourselves about loving particularly. It's they who we are most susceptible to loving generally, because it's they, go with me on this, who we convince ourselves that we fully understand and know. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I hope this illustration will work. If not, that's why we have discussion afterwards. Because of our own selfishness, we naturally tend to make ourselves the central actor in our life story, and we proceed to cast our loved ones in the supporting roles of that grand story arc. Or put another way, we stand as the subject in our life sentence, and our loved ones serve as the direct objects. We don't intend to do this. Certainly we do not intend to do this. We don't want to do this. It just happens. What I want to do, I do not. What I don't want to do, that I do. And because we perceive ourselves as the central characters in our own story, we find ourselves annoyed by the way our loved ones constantly interfere with the direction we want our plot to go. And here, where someone else's agenda gets in the way of ours, here is where we see the very occasion for forgetting our loved one's own particularity. It's not the major plot twist that we resent loved ones throwing into our story. That's what we decide and say and seed and claim we are going to be on board for when we get in these important relationships, the major plot twists. It's the tiny and the unimportant wrinkles in the seemingly unimportant scenes that steal the particular love from our relationships. For instance, I hope this hypothetical will work. We're watching television. Suddenly our loved one, it's nighttime by the way. We're watching television. Suddenly our loved one needs us to run out to grab something he or she left in the car. Let's say that it's a laptop. We've just removed our shoes. We've had a long, hard day. We don't feel like going back outside. And we ask, are you going to use it tonight? They say no. No. I don't want to leave it in the car because it might overheat. It might get too hot. We say, well, you know, it's 73 degrees outside, and I've seen the weather. It's not supposed to get below 55, so it's going to be okay. Well, you never know, they respond. And still, what if someone breaks in? We say, well, we've lived here 7 years. No one's ever broken in, so I think there's a pretty good chance somebody's going to break in tonight. And even if they do, we're insured against this very thing, so it's okay. But still, they say, exasperated. But still, we say, exasperated. And here's the thing. We are exasperated in this moment because we know the only reason they want us to go get that laptop is because they just have to be in control of everything. It's just who they are. And they're exasperated because the only reason we don't want to go get the laptop is because they're just incapable of taking anything seriously. That's just who they are. And right here, in that statement right there, that's just who they are. Right there is where particular love has stopped. We've just determined in our own mind that we know and understand and fully comprehend our loved one. We've turned them into a caricature. Didn't mean to, but we have turned them into an object that we can define and that we can explain. He always needs to be in control. She can never take anything seriously. And on and on and on. Anytime we do this, and we do it all day, every day, with everyone that we become really close to, we're deceiving ourselves into thinking that we fully comprehend the other person. And as soon as we do that, we rob them of their uniqueness and their complexity and their humanity. And suddenly, even though we never intended to, they become objects that we seek to control for the purposes of our own story. Again, heavens knows we do not mean to do this. It's the last thing we ever want to do. It just simply happens constantly without our approval. To extend this metaphor, which I've already extended far too long, I realize already. I'm almost done with it, I promise. As soon as we think we understand another person, we, in essence, have just assumed for ourselves the role of the writer who created them, who created that character. The writer responsible for putting that character in our story, and thus we feel we should be able to control how they move about in our grand plot. The Jewish philosopher / theologian Martin Buber made an incredibly important insight to this very idea. He published a book called I and Thou, in which he argued that we're designed to be in relationship with God and others where we constantly see the other as a thou, as you. In other words, as subjects as opposed to objects. However, according to Buber, our selfish nature causes us to immediately, in all interactions, try to define and comprehend the other, and we immediately turn people into its instead of into yous. And when we see someone as an it, as someone we understand and can explain, we've completely stripped them of the totality of their humanity, and in so doing, we've made pure particular love for them impossible. Buber's greatest point here is that we do this not only with human beings, but with God. Buber claims that we're designed to continue all our lives growing in our relationship with and in our understanding of God and who God is and what it means to be created by God and loved by God. But instead, we turn God into an object that we feel that we can already comprehend, that we can already give bullet points to explain, thus making pure love for God impossible, because all we've really done is boxed in an image that we can get our brains around, and once we've done that, we unintentionally turn it into an idol. The subjects of the story we then set out trying to figure out how to get this object, God, to serve our own purposes. So to tie this all back together and to bring it back to a positive note, because we're really getting bummer-like in here, I know. It's only the unfathomable, incomprehensible God who can and who does love with constant and with never-ending particularity. Always. Always loves each of us as a unique, complexly unique individual. So while I will spend the rest of my life trying to love Ada and trying to love April as unique, complex human beings, I will continue, because of my innate selfishness, to deceive myself into thinking that I fully comprehend them. Because of that, without my knowing it, without my intention, I will do or I will say things that either in the moment or sometime far down the road will cause them some measure of pain and hurt. I'll never mean to do it. Never mean to do it. But like Paul, that which I do not want to do, I do. And that which I don't want to do, that I do. However, God will continue to love me, and will continue to love Ada, will continue to love April, and will continue to love all of you purely, selflessly, in the way that God intends for us to all love one another, because that is what love is. Anything outside of that is not love. It is sentiment. While God could have chosen to create us as robots, God chose to give us freedom. And in giving us freedom, God takes the risk of our not returning that pure particular love. But to the point, that's what love is. It's respecting someone's individuality so much that you at all times relinquish all claims of control over them. Not care or concern, but control. It's getting our own self out of the way so that our loved ones can have a true self as well. Or as Thomas Merton puts it, the beginning of love is the will to let those we love be perfectly themselves. The resolution not to twist them to fit our own image. It's this kind of love that we, as the central actors in our own stories, as the subjects of our own sentences, it's this kind of love that we demand from those around us. That every experience of our lives is crying out for that kind of love. It's this kind of love that we hold for ourselves. Consequently, it's therefore this kind of love Jesus asks us to practice toward our neighbors. Love your neighbors as yourselves, he says. And thus he means as particular, individual, infinitely complex persons. Are we going to always come short of this goal? Yes. That which we don't want to do, we do. That which we do want to do, that we don't do. I just screwed that all up, but you know what I meant. But the more aware we are of the individuality of our loved ones, of their incomprehensible individuality, the more we'll be able to love them particularly the way that we want to be loved. The more aware we are of the incomprehensibility of God, the more likely we are to grow in our understanding of just how much God loves us and what an indescribable gift our personal freedom and our relationships with our loved ones really are. Because that's what they are. Incomprehensible gifts. And the more aware we are of our penchant to rob one another of our imago Dei, of the beauty and innocence and preciousness borne by each and every one of us, the more we will realize that we are all, at our core, that same old stupid boy. Good news is, it's never too late for us to learn and to grow. Every day, every second, we can relearn the same thing. We can experience change, and we can constantly practice moving from general love or to particular love. Or as Keith Urban puts it in another song, There's a new breeze blowing like I've never known. I'm breathing deeper than I've ever done. It sure feels good to finally feel the way I do. I want to love somebody like you. You. Not it. You. That's what I have for today, Way.
Open your heart, open your soul, and let me slide on in. You are my love, you are my light, that always guides my way through this black maze of flesh and pain. You always push me through. If you fall fast, love, I'll carry you till it all comes shining through. Oh, love, I love you. I do, I do, I do. You always stand by me. You're still true. Oh, love, you hold me. You do, you do, you do. There you are, and you still love me. You still, when I set you free.